In today's video, we have lots more playoff action to recap. We have some more information regarding a signing in Los Angeles. Plus, we also have some trade talk around Toronto Maple Leafs, the Philadelphia Flyers, and the Detroit Red Wings. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots of news and some trade talk to take a look at today, but we want to start first with our playoff recaps. And obviously, lots of more playoff games went down last night. A few more already early starts here today. We've had our earlier start times on the weekends, which is pretty normal. Yesterday, we saw a really fun entertainment game between Vegas and Winnipeg. The Golden Knights were leading the Jets 4-1. The Jets came all the way back in the third period, tied things up. Late goals from Mark Scheifele and Adam Lowry. Really late, it was like a minute to go. Got things tied, sent it to overtime. Unfortunately, right at the end of the regulation time in the third period, Pierre-Luc Dubois had to take a penalty. It was actually a good penalty, though. He did prevent Mark Stone from scoring a potential winning goal in the dying seconds. So the Jets were able to go into overtime, kill that off. Unfortunately, though, Dubois ended up taking yet another penalty later into double overtime, because that's where we ended up after all that of back and forth action. Unfortunately, this was didn't lead to a power play goal, but it happened right after the penalty expired. The second penalty that Dubois took, in my opinion, was avoidable, a little bit careless on his part. He went in, another issue with Mark Stone, but when he went in to make his check, he stuck his leg out, ended up tripping him, which is, to me, like I said, just unnecessary and avoidable. The power play didn't connect, but right after, a few seconds later, Michael Amadio scores on a turnover from Dylan Sandberg. He tried to go up the boards as an outlet pass to the winger. Unfortunately, hit a Vegas skate, popped right up to the slot. Amadio's there, pops it home. Overtime is done. The winner goes to Vegas. They're now up 2-1 in the series. The other big unfortunate news for Winnipeg in that game is early in the first period, top defenseman Josh Morrissey did get injured, ended up leaving the game, and they've been down, so he's at the very least done for the series. They didn't say done for the season, so if Winnipeg can get by Vegas, there's a possibility he could return afterwards, but at the very least, he's done for the first round, which is certainly bad news. He's a very important player for Winnipeg, and it's not going to make things any easier, and they're not feel battle now that they're behind in this series. We also saw the Devils come alive in the series with the Rangers. The Rangers were trying to go up 3-0. New Jersey prevented that. They were tied 1-1. Pretty back and forth, fairly even game. Ended up in overtime, where we saw Dougie Hamilton score the overtime winner. They put in Schmid in the net for the Devils, took Benechek out, so they changed their goaltender. Obviously, Schmid played very well, only allowing one Ranger goal, which is great. Chris Kreider had the earlier goal for the Rangers. Jack Hughes had scored for the Devils. And all in all, the Devils are back in the series 2-1, where all games have been won by the road team in that series. The Maple Leafs and Lightning had a really entertainment game as well. Lots of chaos ensued. Again, it's been a pretty back and forth series. Lots of great goals, lots of physicality, and certainly lots of hatred built in between these two teams as well. The Leafs win in overtime 4-3. It was a back and forth game. We saw ultimately the Leafs fell behind, but it was pretty early on, like back and forth, like Leafs scored, Lightning scored, Leafs scored, Lightning scored. Then the Leafs got behind by a 3-2 score. The Lightning ended up getting the lead, but then Ryan O'Reilly scores late to tie things up for the Maple Leafs, and then they win in overtime with Morgan Riley getting the eventual overtime winner. We even seen a fight between Steven Stamkos and Austin Matthews, which isn't something you normally see. Neither player's known for fighting. Stamkos kind of grabbed Matthews and just started throwing punches after a big hit on Braden Point from Morgan Riley earlier. Originally, Riley was called for a major penalty, but it was reviewed, and they took the penalty away. I do think they made the right call in that scenario. I don't think Riley was trying to do anything deliberate or trying to injure Point at all. He did go hard into the boards because they were both going at good speeds. But at the end of the day, I think it was just an unfortunate outcome to a clean play. But afterwards, all chaos ensued. Kucherov grabbed Riley, and then just a whole bunch of players, and they started squaring off. And eventually, which led to Stamkos grabbing Matthews. And just kind of like some chaos ensued. It was pretty crazy. The hatred is certainly building between both clubs, but the Leafs take a 2-1 series lead. They've now won the past two games. It's not often you see Vasilevsky lose 2 games in a row in the playoffs, so that streak that he had has certainly been more recent that we've seen than it happened. As I believe it was only like a year or so ago where he was like, I think he was like 21-0 after a loss. He never lost 2 in a row, but between last year's playoffs and this year's playoffs, it's happened now a few times, so he's becoming a little bit more back to life, back to normal, so to speak. The Avalanche also spoiled in the very first game in Climate Pledge Arena, defeating the Seattle Kraken 6-4. The Kraken had a good start to the game again, but the Avalanche certainly came alive and certainly had an offensive outburst with McKinnon and Rantanen both getting 2 goals apiece. Jaden Schwartz scored a couple of goals for the Kraken, and the Avalanche take a 2-1 series lead. Cale Makar also scored in that game. The Avalanche are also playing not only without Gabe Landeskog, who was not going to be returning this year, Val Nichushkin as well, who's a big, strong winger, very important player for them. We don't really know the full extent of why he was out there. Basically, they're saying personal reasons. There was other reporters saying that it might have been an injury, that he wasn't in Seattle anymore. Just a lot of confusion. I mean, if it is personal, we don't need to know any more than that. But there's really no, clear-cut reason over time on it, so we don't really know what's going on there, except that he's out for now. I'm not sure if he'll be back for the next game or what. We'll have to wait and see on that. And of course, early game today, we saw a couple of games as well. We saw the Hurricanes take a 3-1 series lead over the New York Islanders. We also seen the Boston Bruins defeat the Florida Panthers as well. So they're also up 3-1 at the end of that game. That was getting a little bit of chaos as well. Linus Ullmark had to leave the game after a scuffle with Matthew Tkachuk there. So the Panthers are certainly getting frustrated, that's fair to say. The Bruins are going to stranglehold in that series, as do the Hurricanes. And it's going to be tough for either the Islanders or the Panthers to come back from a 3-1 deficit. So good chance we're going to see the Bruins or Hurricanes are both likely move on to round number 2. Also signing today as well, the Los Angeles Kings have signed prospect goalie Eric Portillo, who they had acquired from the Buffalo Sabres earlier this year from the University of Michigan. We knew Portillo was a really good prospect goalie who the Buffalo was not going to sign. We were not really sure why. I think he just seen guys like Devin Levi, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen ahead of him on the depth chart and wanted a more of a sure opportunity to be able to play sooner. Obviously, based on its conversations with LA, they might obviously have given him assurance that's going to happen. So we'll see. But Portillo signs a 2-year ELC, and he's been called up as well. So he'll remain with the Kings Black Aces here during this playoff run. They've also called out some other players as well to join that group. So good signing there for LA. No big surprise. Obviously, LA must have been confident they were going to sign him after acquiring his rights earlier this season. Now onto the trade rumor front. A couple of teams we want to take a look at. One is Detroit. I know if you take a look at the Red Wings, I'm not sure exactly what we're going to all see from them this offseason. They certainly have a number of players on their team that's signed now. They dipped into free agency a lot last year. They got Captain Dylan Larkin extended to a long-term deal ahead of the NHL trade deadline. So they certainly have a lot of pieces in place that they're fond of for the future. But one piece that we thought was going to be more secure in the spot by now was Filip Zadina. Of course, with the 2018 draft pick, certainly was a guy who fell a little bit in the draft order when he became available to them at number 6 overall. They felt the need that they had to select him. I mean, he was a highly rated prospect. I played his junior hockey with the Halifax Mooseheads. I know I've seen him play live a few times, had a real solid junior career. And it just hasn't really worked out. A combination of injuries and just adapting to the pro game. Things have come along a lot slower than many have thought. I mean, he spent a long time in the minors. You take a look at some other players that were drafted in and around him, like Brady Tkachuk, for example, or Quinn Hughes. They're at superstar level, signing long-term mega deals, playing huge roles in their teams, whereas he's, not even a regular NHL player on every night basis right now. So, he's a guy that still has, I think, a fair bit of potential, but it might be a case of him needing a fresh start before he can really fully realize that. I mean, obviously, if you take a look around the league, wouldn't be shocking if we seen Detroit hook up with another team, with another maybe comparable type player who's maybe not, 21 to 23 year range. That's maybe, not realizing his full potential, needs a fresh start as well. We quite often see players like that swap for each other, maybe another first round pick from, 2, 3, 4 years ago that either isn't happy or not living up to expectations that could benefit from that. So the Red Wings could very well move Zadina based on reports we're seeing from Detroit media. So that's a potential there as well. And in Philadelphia, I know new GM Danny Briere is not afraid to be honest with the media, not afraid to emphasize how long things might take to get things turned around. And obviously he was not afraid to use the word rebuild and talk about how this team is going to be going through a lot of transformation and a lot of change over the next several years as they kind of tear it down, build it back up. And one thing that he said in a recent interview, which is kind of got a lot of people wondering just how deep this rebuild's going to go, is he said the rebuild could take 2, 5, even 8 years. Like, he's not really sure, and I can understand that because, for one, you don't know how some of your prospects are going to develop. You don't know what kind of luck you're going to have in a draft lottery. There's a lot of variables that are tough to predict. So he's not saying it's going to take 8 years, but he's saying 2, 5, 8. Like, he doesn't really know, but certainly shows that he's prepared for the long haul. So it does make you wonder if some of the players that we've talked about that have been mentioned in the trade rumor mill that are on the younger side of things may very well be tradable as well. Like we saw Chicago move like Alex DeBrincat and Kirby Dach last year. They're not old players by any means. Still on the 22, 23, 24 range. Like, that's a player that you don't expect to be traded in a rebuilding team per se. But they think it's going to take a long time. In some cases, it does make some sense. Now, obviously, in Philly, we talked a bit about Kevin Hayes, maybe Tony DeAngelo, possibly a guy like Travis Sanheim, all those players that are a little bit more established NHL players, a little bit older, longer-term deals in some cases. But then you've got other players like Carter Hart or even Joel Farabee. I've seen Joel Farabee's name mentioned in the rumor mill as well. Haven't really talked about him a whole lot because up until now, I kind of wondered if really would they really consider doing that. But if Briere is prepared for a 5 to 8 year rebuild, they have to be prepared to move just about anybody. If they can get the right return, which obviously is going to determine a lot of what they do here, they have to be able to consider that. There's no doubt. So certainly, Carter Hart would bring them a massive return, and there's definitely teams out there that are certainly looking for players like him that need help on goal. They want to add a young goalie. Like Ottawa comes to mind. Prime team. They have a lot of young players. Needs to solidify goaltending. I don't know if they'd want to pay the price tag that Philly's going to want, but still, there's definite need of there that could be, really intriguing. Joel Farabee is a potential to be a really high-scoring winger, I think. I think he could consistently be a 30-plus goal scorer, given the right line mates opportunity, etc. So we might see some bigger moves and some price trades out of Philly that we might not have expected before, based on how patient, how long Briere's willing to take this. But it's all going to boil down to the returns. He's not going to make a move if he's not happy with what's coming back to help them along in this process. The other team I want to take a look at here is the Toronto Maple Leafs and goalie Matt Murray. Certainly, but based on what we've seen, especially in the second half of the season for the Leafs, in the early part of these playoffs in this series against Tampa, I have no doubt Ilya Samsonov is going to get re-signed and be their goalie of the future. But I also don't have much of a hard time to think that Joseph Woll is very well going to be a full-time backup in the NHL as early as next year. They don't really have a need for Matt Murray anymore, with Samsonov and Woll really solidifying that position. Now, of course, they have another year of Murray under contract, and they could consider a buyout of all cases here. That might be something that we see, but I'm sure the Leafs would rather trade him if they could, because then they move the full cap hit off, or maybe they retain a little bit, and he gets traded from there. Obviously, the Senators already retained some money on his contract before he was traded to the Leafs, so they could retain a little bit more. But there's teams out there that are not expected to be super competitive and may not really care too much. So the Leafs might have to add a sweetener in there. They had to do this last year with Peter Mrazek. Obviously, they don't want to have to do this 2 years in a row, but it's a contract that they're going to want to get rid of. There's no doubt, given their tight cap situation and the fact that they have some key players that are going to need new contracts here. So this is going to be a big offseason for the Leafs, regardless of how the rest of the playoffs go. They have players like Austin Matthews and William Nylander eligible for extensions. They have to decide some of these rental players like Ryan O'Reilly. Are they going to try to keep them? Can they come back? Of course, Samsonov needs a new deal. He'll get a 1-year contract as well. What do they do with their goaltending? Like, is it Samsonov and Woll next year? Do they try to move Murray? What do they do here? Because Murray's been inconsistent. He can't stay healthy. Plays a few good games and he has a few bad games. I just don't see a case where they're going to want to have this contract on their books next year. So to me, you're looking at teams like Chicago, maybe San Jose. There's certainly some holes in goaltending there. And then you have to think that at some point that they're going to have to pay to get Murray's a contract off the books or consider a buyout and that he won't return in Toronto next year. I just don't see any way that they could do that. I mean, they can give Samsonov a raise and then have Woll on his cheaper contract and it's the NHL level. That would be great value for them if they can move away from this one. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 52 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.